It was 1917 and a war was brewing between Austria-Hungary and Serbia due to the assassination of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
During the 4 years of the World War I conflict, Germany, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and Austria-Hungary, also known as the Central Powers, fought against Japan, France, Great Britain, Italy, Romania, Canada, United States, and Russia, also known as the Allied Powers.
Due to the new military technology as well as the horrific conditions of trench warfare, World War I saw really high levels of carnage and destruction that killed 16 million people, including everyone from soldiers to innocent civilians.
Camp Lewis is a military base founded in 1917 and was built using 70,000 acres, including parts of the Nisqually tribe's reservation. They built the base due to the rise of World War I. The newly founded base had a colossal amount of activity as many soldiers mobilized and trained for war.
Back in 1891, Lieutenant Ambrose Barclay Wyckoff was authorized to buy the land for the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. The 179 acres, or 0.7 kilometers squared, of land in Bremerton, Washington, was bought for a mere $9,512.51. 2 decades after the purchase, a war was about to start. During World War I, the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard was mainly used as a place to make marine vessels for the U.S. Navy, adding hundreds of ships and boats to the Allied war effort.
When World War I ended in 1918, Pierce County handed the property of Camp Lewis over to the federal government. Also, when the war ended, the Nisqually tribe petitioned to get their land back and was denied by the Secretary of War. Eventually, in 1926, Congress passed a 10-year building plan to reuse several military bases, Camp Lewis being one of them. Then in 1927, Camp Lewis was classified as a fort. Camp Lewis would then be known as Fort Lewis.
After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941, 5 of the 6 surviving battleships, also known as the Pearl Harbor Ghosts because the Japanese had declared the ships sunk, were sent to the PSNS for modifications and repair.
The following ships were sent to the PSNS: USS Tennessee, USS Maryland, USS Nevada, USS California, and the USS West Virginia.
During World War II, the PSNS repaired 26 battleships, 18 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, and 79 destroyers. 30,000 PSNS workers built 53 new vessels, including 5 aircraft carriers and 13 destroyers.
According to the Densho Encyclopedia, from 1942 to 1943, 42 Japanese, German, and Italian Americans were held at Fort Lewis as part of the government's enemy alien internment program during the World War II. The Japanese and Italian internees were transferred to Fort Missoula and the Germans to Fort Lincoln, and the temporary detention facility closed on March 30, 1943.
After World War II, the PSNS's mission was changed to deactivating marine vessels, stripping them of their guns and equipment to be sold as scrap metal, and to modernizing already existing aircraft carriers to fit the way new planes needed to take off and land. By the end of 1946, there were less than 9,000 PSNS employees, who were mostly working on the deactivation of vessels and other routine overhauls.
The PSNS was used for a brief 3 years during the Korean War in 1950. Before going back to the deactivation and modernization of the ships and vessels.
Also in 1950, the PSNS started using a nearby ravine as a waste yard. The ravine in question, Gorse Creek Ravine in Port Orchard, was soon contaminated by hazardous chemicals, including pesticides, polychlorinated biphenyls, and metals such as lead, chromium, and arsenic.
This contamination started to affect the fish in the creek, as well as other local life.
Gorse Creek is the home to the then endangered salmon and steelhead. The hazards also endangered the coastal cutthroat trout, which is a state priority species.
The landfill's steep hills were the cause of many landslides that affected the water quality and habitat of the creek. This threatened to severely affect the Suquamish tribe's fishing and hatchery operations, cutting off one of the tribe's major sources of food.
The Gorse Creek Ravine would later be cleaned in 2015, but more on that later.
In the early 1970s, the PSNS would accomplish making the first ever U.S. nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise, and in the 1980s, the PSNS was working on overhauling nuclear submarines.
During the 1990s, the PSNS pioneered environmentally safe ways of deactivating and recycling nuclear vessels. The PSNS was the only naval shipyard in the U.S. to be authorized to recycle nuclear vessels.
In 2010, Fort Lewis and McChord Air Base merged and became JBLM, also known as Joint Base Lewis-McChord. This is now the base we know and love today.
On March 3, 2015, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency issued an order for the cleanup of the Gorse Creek landfill due to the hazardous waste contaminating the creek. The order included permanently rerouting the creek and restoring a fish passage.
As of the 21st century, the National Park Service offers limited access to the historical sites of the PSNS. Through its National Historic Landmark, and JBLM has even more restrictions requiring an adult with an authorized Department of Defense ID card.